Some games fly in the face of convention and just defy all expectation. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 games that proved everyone wrong. Starting off with number 10, it's Baldur's Gate 3. Fans of Larian's previous games, like Divinity Original Sin 2, knew that Baldur's Gate 3 was going to be good, but I don't think anyone predicted just how big a success this game was going to end up being. It's a niche PC RPG. I'm not sure where the number stands right now, but on Steam alone, people estimate this game sold over 10 million copies since its release back in August, well above any reasonable expectations for a game of this type. Everyone underestimated it, including Phil Spencer, Microsoft's big guy, who called it a second-run Stadia PC RPG in a leaked email discussing potential Game Pass partnerships. In Microsoft's estimation, this was not even a blip on the radar. And it's easy to call Phil's assessment clueless after the fact, but I don't think anybody knew. Before Baldur's Gate 3, people assumed PC RPGs just didn't sell like this. Turns out all the genre really needed was some AAA production values, an intriguing cast of characters, and about 3 years of early access to iron out a bunch of rough edges. There's a lot more to it than that, of course. There's extremely positive word of mouth, along with the game's Steam-friendly format that really helped bolster sales. But even Larian themselves absolutely did not expect this kind of success. They projected something like 100,000 concurrent players when the game came out, and the number was actually closer to 875,000. According to SteamDB. Clearly, they knew they had something good on their hands, but even they underestimated it by a lot.
Damn! The man knows what he wants. First one's on the house. So, don't come bawling to me if your big toes fall off or your tongue coils in a knot.
At number 9 is Doom 2016. In hindsight, very easy to call Doom 2016's success obvious, but back when it came out, the game's quality wasn't just assumed. Remember, it was a game that had been in development hell since 2008, and during previews, it had been called Call of Doom multiple times, derisively so. It wasn't just a reboot, like it had had its development rebooted several times. Leading up to release, previews were really skeptical about it. Nobody's quite sure what to make of it, and a lot of the failure of the pre-release marketing, it goes to Bethesda. For whatever reason, they decided, why show anything from the campaign? We shall show the multiplayer mode and the crappy snap map feature, where you could make like really primitive, not particularly enjoyable maps and share them with friends. All that, and no advanced review copies. This all left everybody with the assumption Bethesda didn't have high hopes for the game, and everyone just assumed the worst. Of course, we now know the game was actually awesome, had an incredible campaign that felt like a huge breath of fresh air after years of Call of Duty style shooters clogging up the market. Nothing against Call of Duty, it's just insert Attack of the Clones joke here. Ironically, the parts of the game Bethesda tried to sell the most, the multiplayer portion, never really got that much attention. It was single player that got all the praise, and for good reason. I don't know what the hell Bethesda was thinking, if they really expected the game not to review well, or I don't know. All anyone could do was assume the worst, so when the game came out and was great, it was a huge relief for Doom fans and everyone who loves old school shooters, though it was a pretty substantial update to the formula. At number 8 is Neo. In 2017, Neo developer Ninja Team wasn't doing that hot. The Dead or Alive franchise was still raking in cash from overpriced seasonal costume bundles. And that's probably the nicest way to say it. Yes, it was definitely the prices that were very big and bouncy. And that was keeping them afloat because the prices were very buoyant. This joke works on multiple levels. Anyway, their action game credentials were at an all-time low. Ninja Gaiden 3, total disgrace. Spin-off Ninja Gaiden Z wasn't made by them, but it was based off their most famous property, and somehow it was even worse. They needed a hit, and Neo proved to be the shot in the arm Koei Tecmo needed. It ended up being the best-selling game in the company's North American branch, beating out both Ninja Gaiden and Dead or Alive, and they didn't even have to rely on boobs. On top of that, Neo had actually been in development hell for more than a decade. The original version of Neo had started development back in 2004, and it was supposed to come out in summer 2006 on PlayStation 3. It wasn't until 2010 that Team Ninja took over the project and slowly shifted development into making it more like a Souls-like. and it took about 7 years for the game to find its footing. That's a long development cycle. Usually when a game is made for that long, it sucks. Like, look at Duke Nukem Forever, but somehow Neo managed to exceed everyone's expectations. Now with the formula properly established, Team Ninja has gone on to make multiple games in that style, and it works really good for them. At this point, their reputation for quality games has been established, so they do that on top of making tons of money off big bouncy boobs. It's really a best of both worlds situation. But the thing about Neo, no one really thought it could be very good. Before it was out, we all knew the story. We knew it was a development hell game, and then the demo came out and changed a lot of people's expectations. It's actually what sold me on the game. Now, the game has its flaws. People are still complaining about the inventory system, but the positives outweigh it so much, and the massive sales numbers that no one expected reflect that. At number 7 is Alien Isolation. This might seem out of place with how much consistent praise this game gets nowadays, but before release, there was actually a lot of skepticism around this game, and even after it came out, it got some pretty mediocre reviews from certain outlets. People wanted a good Alien game after the disaster that was Alien Colonial Marines, but because that game turned out so bad, a lot of people went in with their guards up. No one wanted to be the one that sang the praises of Colonial Marines. Keep in mind, this is a fairly unique game from a developer with basically zero horror game experience. It was made by Creative Assembly, the Total War guys, not exactly the people you think of when it comes to horror. I mean, it's not to say it got all bad reviews when it came out. Most of them were pretty positive, many of them extremely positive. And over the years, the game's reputation's only improved as people have come to accept and embrace the unique vision of this game. The Alien AI was revolutionary at the time, again, especially in contrast to Aliens Colonial Marines. And now, even almost a decade later, it's still pretty impressive. Something that really hasn't been matched in terms of feel. I don't know in terms of technical prowess. I'm sure somebody's come up with something better, but implementation matters a lot. And Alien Isolation really nails it. It can be a punishing game, but that sort of gameplay is seen as a positive by a lot of people rather than a negative. Although, when it first came out, it kind of was looked at as a negative. A lot of people assumed this would fall victim to the licensed game curse, but it ended up being one of the good ones. At number 6 is No Man's Sky, a game that's a little different because in most respects the negative reactions came after the game came out rather than before. I mean, it kind of proved people wrong more than once. Stay with me on this one. Everybody thought this game was going to be frigging amazing. The game was really overly hyped. The devs led people to believe the game could be much, much more than it was. So when it was really bare bones and it came out, people were really pissed off. They were proven wrong. Oh wow, we thought this was going to be a lot more. We were wrong about that. The game was review bombed on Steam, got a lot of middling reviews by press outlets. It was even accused of false advertising in a lawsuit that was dropped. They were cleared of that, but it didn't take the stigma away. Now, most developers would have taken the money and run, but Hello Games just stuck to their original plan. If you've ever watched the story behind this game, there's so much crap that went down in the background, and it makes total sense they weren't able to ship the game that they wanted to, but they brought in an absolute ton of money and were like, you know what, let's make this into the game we wanted it to be. And they did just that and kept updating the game for free for years. Every single update is free. They're entirely dependent on new game sales, and that's kept the company making tons of money. Why? Because the updates make the game better and better and better. It's probably better than the thing they originally hyped it to be at this point. I don't know, maybe that's a bold claim, but again, no one expected that to happen, and everyone was proven wrong. When this game first came out, they were calling it a scam, unironically. That's how bad their reputation was. It's pretty remarkable how much they've managed to turn public opinion around. At number 5 is Sonic Frontiers. Expectations for Sonic Frontiers were rock bottom. Other than Sonic Mania, which was not by the main development team at Sega, by 2022, Sonic was in dire straits. The previous Sonic game was Sonic Forces. It was unimpressive. Not the worst thing ever made, but it wasn't good. I was pretty fair to it if you go back to our Before You Buy on it. It's a game that's got elements of what really works with Sonic, and a bunch of stuff that doesn't, and none of it lasts long enough to matter. Prior to that, there was Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric and Sonic Lost World, and those were not games that blew anyone's mind. Most people by this time were like, you know what, Sonic doesn't work in 3D. So a Sonic open world game, at the time, it seemed like they could barely make a regular side-scroller without screwing it up. So how are they going to do this? Early previews didn't inspire a lot of confidence about it either. They made it look janky and frustrating. Everyone assumed this was going to be a flop pre-release. Everyone except your boy Falcon! Go back to my video about how Sonic Frontiers was going to be good. Go back to it. Oh, it's aged well. It proved everyone else wrong, though. Everybody assumed it was going to be a flop. And then, new impressions started coming out that were a lot more positive. And then, the game finally got released, and it got pretty good review scores. Not incredible ones, but better than anyone expected. And everyone was like, wait a second. Look, if it worked for all of these skeptics of Sonic, even on a mild level, I gotta try it. And people ended up really liking this game. And it's gotten a ton of support after release, including a lot of great physics updates. And yeah, the game does have its problems, particularly when it comes to visuals and particularly on certain hardware. But they finally basically figured out Sonic. In fact, that's what I said in my video about it. It looks like they might have figured out 3D Sonic. This game ended up being the best-selling 3D Sonic game of all time, and that's saying a lot. Sonic Frontiers 2 is going to get the AAA big-budget treatment, and I cannot wait. I haven't said anything about it, but still, I can't wait. Like, with all the feedback that Sonic Frontiers got, how much people loved all these certain elements about it, and the things that didn't work, they didn't actually hate, but it's really obvious what didn't work. Oh, Sonic Frontiers 2 is going to be good. I mean, unless Sonic Team, decides to go back to their old ways. I don't think they're gonna. Look at Sonic Superstars. It looks like they figured out, hey, you know what? If we do what people want, they'll like it. I hope it doesn't go too far in that direction. The pendulum can go too far in that direction, but still. At number 4 is Dead Island 2. Everything about this game, pre-release, screams flop. It was in development hell for years. It was passed around by multiple developers. The studio that ended up finishing it was unproven, and that's putting it pretty mildly here. Then the game came out in April of 2023, and although everyone's expectations were very low, it exceeded them like it was nothing. The game, it wasn't a revelation or anything, but it was a really solid experience that a lot of zombie game fans preferred over the much more big and ambitious Dying Light 2. Dambuster is the developer who finally put it over the finish line, and if you know that name, you know why people were concerned. They were the people that made Homefront the Revolution, the absolute disaster of a game that may have had some decent visuals, but the performance was just unacceptable on consoles and it never felt good to play. Dead Island 2 is the polar opposite. It's smooth, looks great, bug-free. Clearly lessons were learned by Homefront, which is, that's saying a lot in modern game development. Let's just say it's not something you can say about every game dev out there. Sales ended up being much better than the publisher projected, so when the game was an all-around success, which isn't something you can say about games like this, everybody was like, hell yeah, okay. Usually when a game's in development hell, you get something like I said earlier, Duke Nukem Forever. It's rare when the game comes out the other side, like a Dead Island 2. It's not the most ambitious game, no, but it's really solid. And holy hell, are there not enough just solid games. So many games are put out in a state nowadays, to say the least. Also, there's so many 100+ hour open world games. Sometimes something more focused is just really, really refreshing. And number 3 is Mad Max, another game with a long development history, another game that we completely called it on. It's not exactly perfect, but everybody assumed this would be some kind of forgettable shovelware, and man was it interesting. This is another one where you had to listen to old Falcon on it to get it right, okay? Go back to my Before You Buy. Once again, keep in mind we were a much less refined outlet at the time. I think I've gotten a lot better at this job with age, but I was still right. Was developed by the American branch of Avalanche Studios, the guys behind the Just Cause games, and a lot of people assume this is going to be a quick cash-in. It was released a few months before the much-anticipated Just Cause 3, and there really just wasn't a lot of hope with this one. Movie tie-in games are just rarely any good, and a lot of people expected a Colonial Marines situation. Not necessarily exactly the product, but the situation the product arose out of. They thought the studio was putting most of their resources into their own project at the expense of a licensed game. If you don't know, Jason Schreier's post-mortem on the game discussed how Gearbox was accused of neglecting Colonial Marines, using the funds Sega gave them for the game to work on Borderlands 2, blah blah blah. So that's not the case with Mad Max. Pre-release info on the game was scarce, the trailers weren't that impressive, and they released it the same day as Metal Gear Solid 5, so most people just assumed they were sending this one out to die. Maybe they were, I don't know, but the game was great. Not perfect, but great. It captured the Mad Max style better than anyone anticipated, and it actually proved to be a bit of a sleeper hit. Wasn't a runaway success or anything, but the expectations were really low for this game, and for it to be decent, kind of was a shock for most. Now for me, I was like, hey, this game reminds me a little bit of Red Faction Guerrilla. Seriously, go back to my Before You Buy. It is a little rough in terms of pacing, but I said everything that needs to be said about this game. And number 2 is Guardians of the Galaxy. I remember the first trailers for this one, and nobody had anything at all nice to say about it. After the mess of the game that was the Avengers, how can anybody trust a Marvel game coming from Square Enix? I was pretty skeptical of it. I was giving it as much of a benefit. Like, if you listen to my tone anytime I talked about this game, I was like, they're saying it's very different from the Avengers. It's not a games as a service game, but we'll see. And the problem there is that nobody really had any idea what this was going to be. And Square Enix, they did not make it easier to figure that out. It didn't look that good, honestly. Combat looked weak and awkward in the previews. Trailers made the dialogue look obnoxious. It all seemed like a future bomb in the making. Yes, it was being made by Eidos Montreal, who worked on Deus Ex Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, so solid pedigree, but Crystal Dynamics of Tomb Raider fame, another developer with quite a pedigree, made the Avengers, and that game was trash. When Guardians of the Galaxy came out, there was zero hype. Everyone went into it thinking it was going to be annoying, that it would be a tedious stinker, and it wasn't. It was actually great. No microtransactions, a surprisingly heartfelt story, and unique gameplay that actually made it a standout in 2021. Sales-wise, it didn't blow up the charts. I think the Avengers burned too many people, and trust just wasn't there to jump into this game. For the people who played it, though, a lot went in assuming it was going to be an awful quip fest of lame jokes, and it ended up being one of the best narratives of that year. Seriously, if you haven't played this game, go back to it. It's not full price anymore, obviously, and it's worth it. It's a great game. It's got this, like, tactical team-based battle mechanic in it on top of the very normal-looking fighting. Seriously, go back to it. You won't regret it.
Gamora! One at 2!
Keep at it!
And finally, at number 1, Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle. In any rational world, this is an idea that wouldn't work. Combining Mario characters with Rabbids, Ubisoft's half-baked answer to the Minions, because I guess they were like, Illuminations from France, and so are we, so we've got to have that. Plus, it's an XCOM-like turn-based tactical strategy game. It just sounds like the ramblings of a madman. I joke, but the first trailer left people with so many questions, and most of them weren't good. General opinions about this one leading up to release were at best mild amusement, at worst outright derision. Nintendo fanboys were already inclined to hate the Rabbids, and Ubisoft fans were also prepared to hate the Rabbids, either for replacing Rayman or because Rabbids. Look at the Rabbids. They are very hateable. Don't even pretend that they're not. It's a crossover no one asked for. So when reviews started showing up and saying this game wasn't just good, it was actually great. It was like being in the friggin' Twilight Zone. This game had no right to be any good, but it was very good. And that's the only way to explain how it managed to sell the way it did. everyone just bought it out of disbelief. There's no way it can be this good. They kind of bought it like wanting to say, you all said it was going to be good, but you were wrong and I was right. It's bad. No one said that. It's this extremely fun and charming tactical game that borrows a lot of ideas from XCOM, but doesn't quite play like anything else out there. When I say sales were good too, I really mean it. The game somehow managed to sell over 10 million copies, far exceeding all expectations. The fact that the Switch was still new at the time probably played a pretty big role in its success, but the novelty of premise along with the positive word also helped out a lot. Not too bad for a game that could have easily just been a one-off April Fool's joke. I also have a bonus for you, Dragon's Dogma. This was before Monster Hunter was popular in the West, and during a somewhat darker time in Capcom's history. There was a lot of skepticism with the games that they were putting out, for good reason. Just 1 month before this game came out in May 2012, Capcom was putting out classics like Resident Evil, Operation Raccoon City, and Street Fighter X Tekken. Beloved games by one and all, right? No, I'm joking. They were not good games. They were terrible games. In this game's case, the demo didn't really do it any favors either. The gameplay came off as a bit awkward, and the confusing presentation made it difficult to tell what this was supposed to be. When it came out, reviews were mixed to positive, and sales were never really great, but the game slowly garnered a small but passionate fan base who really came to appreciate what they were trying to do with it. It's almost universally held in high regard now. The sequel is highly anticipated, but before, no one really knew what to make of it. Even after it came out, it took a while for people to warm up to it, but it did eventually become a real cult classic. It's one of those games everyone assumed kinda wouldn't be good before it came out, and then the result was also just way better than the demo was. The demo was confusing. There wasn't enough context. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter @FalconTheHero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.